In August 2014, a dam failure in British Columbia poured 24 million cubic meters of mining waste into one of Canada's cleanest lakes in a single morning. Great Slave Lake in the Northwest Territories is 614 meters deep, and its water temperature never rises above 12 degrees even in July. And in Lake Winnipeg, cyanobacteria blooms have killed dogs drinking from the shore and forced indigenous communities away from water they have depended on for thousands of years. Today, we are exploring 12 Canadian lakes so deadly, locals won't let their kids near the water. So stay tuned till the end, because number 1 will blow your mind. Number 12, Couchog Lake, Ontario. About 180 kilometers north of Toronto, in the Haliburton Highlands on Anishinaabe territory, Couchog Lake sits at the heart of Ontario cottage country. Families have been swimming here for generations. For most of the 20th century, the water was clear. That changed. Phosphorus runoff from lakeside lawns, failing septic systems, and heavy summer boat traffic began feeding cyanobacteria blooms across Couchog and surrounding Haliburton Lakes through the 2000s. By the 2010s, Haliburton County was issuing annual advisories warning against swimming and any pet contact with the water. Blue-green algae produce microcystins, liver toxins that can kill a dog within hours and cause severe neurological illness in children. Today, the blooms appear every summer. The cottages remain full. Families have quietly learned to check the provincial health bulletin before deciding whether to let their kids in the water. Number 11, Kootenay Lake, British Columbia. About 70 kilometers east of Nelson, on the territory of the Katunaxa Nation, Kootenay Lake stretches 109 kilometers through a narrow mountain valley. It looks untouched. For decades, the sediment at its bottom told a different story. The Trail Smelter, operated by Cominco Limited and later Teck Resources, began discharging zinc, lead, cadmium, and arsenic into the upper Columbia River system in 1896. Kootenay Lake sits downstream. By the mid-20th century, sediment samples showed contamination levels exceeding federal guidelines for the protection of aquatic life by significant margins. Health advisories on consuming certain fish species from Kootenay Lake persisted for decades. Teck has invested in remediation since the 2000s. The contamination in the lake sediment has not gone anywhere. It is simply resting. Number 10, Lac Saint-Jean, Quebec. About 200 kilometers north of Quebec City, on the traditional territory of the Pikwakamiulnuatch, the Lake St. John Innu. Lac Saint-Jean receives the outflow of 3 major rivers simultaneously: the Ashuapmushuan, the Mistassini, and the Peribonka. Together, they drive powerful subsurface currents across the lake's basin that no surface reading can detect. Lac Saint-Jean holds one of the worst drowning records of any inland water body in Quebec. The currents are invisible from shore. Swimmers caught in them have almost no time to react before being pulled under. Restricted swimming zones have been expanded repeatedly. Warning signs are posted in multiple languages. The lake is still beautiful in summer. It is still dangerous in ways the water does not advertise. Number 9, Lake Erie, Ontario. Lake Erie is the shallowest of the 5 Great Lakes, with an average depth of only 19 meters. That shallowness, combined with decades of agricultural phosphorus runoff from both sides of the Canada-United States border, has created conditions unlike any other Great Lake. Every summer, the western basin of Lake Erie produces an algae bloom visible from space. The 2011 bloom covered roughly 5,000 square kilometers, the largest ever recorded on the lake. The dominant organism is Microcystis aeruginosa, a cyanobacterium that produces liver toxins. In 2014, Toledo, Ohio, shut off drinking water for 500,000 people because of Lake Erie contamination. Canadian beaches along the Ontario shoreline face seasonal closures every year. The lake looks the same from shore as it always has. The water does not. Number 8, Cultus Lake, British Columbia. About 100 kilometers east of Vancouver on Stowe Low territory, Cultus Lake has drawn recreational visitors since the early 1900s. Provincial parks surround it. Campgrounds fill every summer weekend without fail. Since the late 1990s, Cultus Lake has been subject to recurring E. coli contamination warnings and cyanobacteria, closures triggered by high summer temperatures, and nutrient loading from surrounding development. In several years, BC health authorities have closed swimming areas entirely. Families have arrived at the lake, read the closure signs at the gate, and driven back. Cultus Lake sits in a contained basin with limited natural flushing, which makes contamination events slow to resolve. Today, locals check provincial health bulletins before making the drive. Standing at its edge on a closed day, with the water sparkling in August sunlight, the danger is completely invisible. Number 7. Lake Diefenbaker, Saskatchewan. About 100 kilometers southwest of Saskatoon, on Treaty 6 territory, Lake Diefenbaker does not appear on any map before 1967. It did not exist. It is a reservoir created by the Gardner Dam, completed by the federal government that year. At the time, one of the largest earth-filled dams ever built. The dam created a recreational lake, and a death risk prairie residents were unprepared for. Water held in the deep reservoir stays dangerously cold far later in summer than any natural lake in the region. Cold water shock, the involuntary gasp reflex triggered by immersion below 15 degrees Celsius, has been implicated in multiple drownings on Lake Diefenbaker, particularly among swimmers who assumed the water was warm. The surface looks inviting. What is directly underneath it is not. I hope you are enjoying this video so far. So why not give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves Canadian history? It would mean a lot. Now, let us continue with our countdown. Number 6. Great Slave Lake, Northwest Territories. About 25 kilometers south of Yellowknife on the traditional territory of the Yellowknives Dene First Nation, Great Slave Lake is the deepest lake in North America, at 614 meters, and one of the most violent bodies of open water on the continent when the weather turns. The Yellowknives Dene have navigated these waters for thousands of years and carry oral knowledge of its most dangerous zones and seasons. That knowledge took generations to build. Great Slave Lake generates waves exceeding 4 meters in open water. Storms arrive with almost no warning. Water temperatures never exceed 12 degrees Celsius in summer. Multiple fishing vessels have sunk here. What goes to 614 meters stays there, standing on its shore in calm weather, with the water flat and the sky enormous. The lake gives nothing away. Number 5. Atlin Lake, British Columbia. In the far northwest corner of British Columbia, about 185 kilometers southeast of Whitehorse on Taku River Tlingit territory, Atlin Lake stretches 145 kilometers through a landscape of glaciers and mountains. The water feeding it comes directly from glacial melt. The surface temperature of Atlin Lake rarely exceeds 8 degrees Celsius, even in mid-July. At those temperatures, cold water shock is immediate, and survival time in the water, without a dry suit, is measured in minutes. The lake is large enough to produce serious open water conditions with almost no notice. Multiple drowning incidents are documented on Atlin Lake across the historical record. Many more belong only to local memory and have never been formally recorded. With glaciers visible from the shore, Atlin Lake is one of the most beautiful sights in this country. That does not make it forgiving. Number 4. Quesnel Lake, British Columbia. About 115 kilometers east of Williams Lake on Sequipmc and Latako Dene territory, Quesnel Lake was regarded for decades as one of the cleanest deep lakes in Canada. Pristine glacially fed water. Exceptional clarity. On August 4th, 2014, that ended in a single morning. The Tailings Pond Dam at the Mount Poly Copper and Gold Mine, operated by Imperial Metals Corporation, failed catastrophically. 24 million cubic meters of mining waste and contaminated water tore through the breach and poured through Hazeltine Creek directly into Quesnel Lake. The volume was equivalent to filling nearly 10,000 Olympic swimming pools. The BC government issued an immediate do-not-use order for the lake and downstream waterways. First Nations communities with water dependencies were left scrambling for alternatives. Documented regulatory lapses contributed to the failure. No criminal charges were ever laid. Number 3. Lake Simcoe, Ontario. About 80 kilometers north of Toronto, on the territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, Lake Simcoe serves as the primary drinking water source and recreational anchor for more than 1.2 million people in its watershed. By the late 20th century, it was dying. Phosphorus loading from agricultural runoff, urban sprawl, and inadequate sewage treatment collapsed, dissolved oxygen levels in the lake's deep water every summer. Without oxygen, the lake bottom became dead zones where fish cannot survive. Lake trout, which Lake Simcoe once supported in healthy numbers, crashed as a population. Scientists raised the alarm in the late 1980s. The Ontario government passed the Lake Simcoe Protection Act in 2008, nearly 2 decades later. Recovery is ongoing. The lake is better than it was. It is not recovered. Number 2, Kamloops Lake, British Columbia. About 40 kilometers west of Kamloops on Sequipmc territory, Kamloops Lake sits at the western end of the Thompson River corridor, narrow, cold, and deceptively powerful beneath its surface. The lake is continuously fed by the Thompson River, which carries glacially cold water year-round. Even in August, surface temperatures in the main body of the lake remain dangerous. Subsurface currents from river inflow create conditions that swimmers and paddlers cannot read from above. The combination of cold water shock and concealed current has been responsible for multiple documented drownings on Kamloops Lake. Local RCMP and search and rescue records show a disproportionate number of incidents on this lake, relative to its size, clustered around areas that look perfectly calm. People who live near it largely do not swim in it. Visitors stop at the viewpoints, take photographs, and drive on. Number 1, Lake Winnipeg, Manitoba. On the shared territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, and Métis peoples who have depended on it for thousands of years, Lake Winnipeg is the 10th largest freshwater lake in the world. It stretches 416 kilometers from north to south and has sustained nations, provided food, and defined communities across an entire region of the continent. Today, it is in the middle of the worst freshwater algae crisis in Canadian history. Lake Winnipeg sits at the base of the largest watershed in Canada, 953,000 square kilometers, draining 4 provinces and 4 American states. Every phosphorus-laden drop of agricultural runoff, every effluent discharge from municipal sewage systems, every contaminant moving through that enormous drainage system eventually arrives here. The lake has no escape from its own geography. Cyanobacteria blooms on Lake Winnipeg have been intensifying since the 1990s. By the mid-2000s, summer blooms were covering thousands of square kilometers of the southern basin. Beaches have been closed repeatedly. In documented cases, dogs that drank from the shoreline during active bloom conditions died within hours. In 2018, researchers identified the Lake Winnipeg system as one of the most phosphorus-polluted large lake basins in the world. For the indigenous communities of the lake, including Fisher River Cree Nation, Peguis First Nation, and Dauphin River First Nation, this is not an environmental statistic. It is the destruction of a way of life. The water that sustained these communities for generations is no longer reliably safe to enter. The federal and provincial governments have known about the phosphorus problem for decades. Binding reduction targets have moved slowly. Manitoba introduced a Lake Winnipeg Stewardship Board in 2003. The blooms have not stopped. Standing on the shore of Lake Winnipeg on a summer morning, watching a green-gray mass move slowly across the surface toward you. The distance between a lake that fed a civilization for thousands of years and what is in the water right now is very difficult to hold in your mind. I hope you have enjoyed this video, so make sure to share it with your friends, and see you in the next video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more journeys through Canada's hidden and forgotten places.